When I was a much younger man, I used to drink Canada Dry. And they still resent me for it. You have any idea just how much you're going to have to pee after drinking Canada Dry? And there's glaciers up there. Talk about brain freeze. I've been trying for a month to get those puns into one of my videos. My name is Robert Bruce Scott, and I am not an educator. I am not a scientist of any stripe. I'm no better than an armchair philosopher. What I am is an entertainer. And I'm not trying to persuade you. I'm not trying to educate you. So if you find yourself persuaded or educated by anything that I have to say, that's entirely on you. The name of my blog is Be Careful, People. It's really stupid out there. I wanted to talk a little bit about a blog post that I posted to that blog back in September of 2017, I think. It was in September of 2017. And I was talking about my parents. And I'm going to put up a photograph of them. This photograph may be from a few years ago, and they've gotten a little older and a little grayer since then, but they're still in such good health that I'm starting to check the newspapers in their hometown for signs of exsanguinated teenage corpses, just in case they might have become vampires when I wasn't paying attention. I'm one of the fortunate ones. I'm the kid who had the really cool parents. My friends always said, "Can I have your parents?" They're a couple of college professors. And I'll have a lot of different things to say about what has been a really unique relationship, I think. I don't think most children have such a good relationship with their parents. And I went through my teenage years and my terrible twos and all the rest of that, my terrible twos, my terrible teens. But they have been remarkably supportive of me and really helped me to lead an exceptionally creative life. I am not a professional musician. I am not a professional entertainer, although I am definitely an entertainer. More as an amateur, meaning in the sense that it's something that I love to do. And their support has really helped me a lot with that. They helped to finance my first book of short stories. And my mother created some artwork for that book later. And I made enough money off of that book to pay for a Christmas album, and made enough off of the Christmas album to pay for yet another album by a group called Three Trees, which I was working with at the time. Made enough off of that album to build a home studio and record several other albums. And over the years, with my various collaborations, I have brought several musicians out of musical retirement. And at least a couple of them have gone on to become professional musicians. People who are much better musicians than I am, and I've certainly profited and benefited from my association with them. And those are long-reaching effects that my parents have had through me to the lives of other people. Hundreds and hundreds of people. I don't know how many people, because one of the musicians that I brought out of musical retirement is now becoming very well known. He's been interviewed on BBC a couple of times as a, I'm going to try to get this term right. Well, I can't. He's a music historian, and he's been particularly interested in things such as slave orchestras, and also concepts about how in Western culture we tend to look at the rest of the world music as world music, instead of understanding that Western music is just a small part of what is a much larger world of music. And in particular, my work with him has led me to sing in at least 50 other languages, some of them made up. So it's been of enormous benefit to me, but it's also been of enormous benefit to other people, because through those performances, hundreds, probably thousands, easily thousands of people have been exposed to music that they would never have heard. traditional Albanian music, traditional Turkish music, traditional or much more recent Greek pop music, but definitely in the Greek style. In 7/8. And in odd rhythms that people in America don't hear all that often. They don't. Americans are, when I say Americans, I mean people in the United States. Often aren't aware of anything beyond 4/4, 3/4, and 6/8, and so when I play music in 7/8 and 9/8, it really broadens their scope, and it's so much fun playing that with little kids. Will get it immediately, and they'll be able to dance to it. Older adults or even older children will have a hard time dancing to those compound rhythms because they're not familiar with them. It doesn't sound like the music that they've become acculturated to. But little kids who haven't quite gotten set into the culture that much, they'll hear the music and they'll be able to dance to it. And I think that is really of benefit to people. And it's all a very long-reaching effect because of the support my parents have provided me to be able to do what I do. I live a very normal life. I decided long ago that I didn't want to be a professional musician, even though I've been told by professional musicians that I certainly have the voice for it. That I could make a living with my voice as a singer. But I decided I didn't want to live on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and try to teach music for a living and go the really rough route of trying to make it as a professional musician. Those lives are rare, and even the big stars don't really make their money off of their music. They make their money off of clothing lines and perfume and stuff like that. So they're really business people, and one thing I definitely am not is a businessman. So I have a lot of respect for these people, but it's not that they have a whole lot more talent than other musicians who are out there. They're just a whole lot better at developing their business. But I want to come back to the influence of my parents, and especially the relationship that it seems there's a very different relationship between children and parents from one generation to the next in the 20th century and 21st century America. And I grew up in a time when I was allowed to be a little wild. I remember at 7 years old, while my mother was working on her PhD, I was just roaming all over Oklahoma University campus and going up in buildings and talking to strange people, and absolutely not afraid myself. I felt completely confident. The stranger danger fear hadn't really set in, and now the stranger danger fear is so pervasive in our culture that children are helicoptered by their parents when statistically they're in much less danger. Those children are in much less danger of stranger danger than I was when I was a kid. And statistically, that's pretty rare, actually, in America. So, I don't remember. At 15 or 13 years old, of a weekend, I'd get up early in the morning, grab a canteen of water and a couple of snacks, hop a fence. We lived on the edge of town, and before the sun was very far up in the sky, I'd be miles and miles away exploring land that probably belonged to some farmer, but they never knew I was there. And then I'd be in the back of beyond. I'm not even sure that I was in land that was claimed by anybody in rural Oklahoma. And I would remember that, I'd just set off in a random direction, and, sometime around noon, I'd start thinking about how to find my way home. And sometimes I dragged my friends along with me on those adventures, and they would be terrified once they realized that I had no clue where we are, and very little clue as to a clear trail on how to get home. But I knew that if I just went long enough in that direction, that I'd find a road, and sooner or later, as I traveled along the road, I'd figure out whether or not I was going the right way, and I could usually tell by the sun which was the right way to get back home. But I did probably cause a lot of anxiety in the friends who I dragged along with me on some of those adventures. But I don't think children are allowed that anymore. And there's a tremendous value to be had in growing up that way. You learn a certain amount of independence and self-reliance, and a certain amount of courage that to jump into things and just start doing something when you don't really know how it's going to turn out. And I suppose that young people today probably develop that skill some other way, but it was in hindsight an incredible way to grow up. So I wanted to kind of mention that, and again, that is another part of the culture that I was imbued with as a child. I'm pretty sure that my father and I know that my mother, had very independent childhoods as well. They're growing up in rural Texas and rural Oklahoma. Another thing about the way that I grew up, I didn't appreciate this until I was considerably older. I grew up in a library, and by the time before I left home, when I was 17 and went out to live on my own for a little while, we had easily several thousand books, and I chewed my way through all of them. And they're big, glorious books of art history with full color photographs of very famous artwork, books on psychology, books on philosophy, mathematics, popularizations of quantum mechanics. I grew up in this really enriched environment and didn't really become very deep in anything, but more broad in learning about things. And I was just interested in everything. Lots of books on history, really lots of interesting, historical novels, kind of a docudrama about various historical figures. So there was just so much culture that I was able to pick up. And it wasn't that any book was thrust on me, you got to read this book or you got to read that book. It was just that they were available, and I learned to read at an early age. And as I grew up, the numbers and the complexity of the books just kept growing, and I just kept reading them. And I realized I didn't realize that was really for me until until about a decade later, visiting my parents. I realized, where are all the books? Well, they got rid of most of them because they didn't need them anymore. So, but anyway, so I had written a blog post that touched on all of these items, or touched on several of them, and about the influence that my parents have had, not just on me, but through me, the influence that I've had on other people. And I wanted to commemorate that. So that's part of a blog post that I wrote many years ago in my blog, which is, be careful, people. It's really stupid out there.